threat looming beneath our feet proves even more expansive than we could ever have imagined. Entire empires of villainous red men have been constructed in the dark depths of the earth, obscured as much in darkness as our willful ignorance. Within my reports, I have aimed to create a comprehensive overview of the menace below, to prepare us for the inevitable doom that will break to the surface someday. All I can hope is that this hard-earned knowledge reaches the right minds in time. The vermin have divided themselves into multiple clans, based on an ancient clan structure that can be traced back to the world that was. Therefore, I have taken the liberty to divide this report into chapters that each detail the history and threats of one particular clan. Within this first chapter of my investigation, the focus will be on the maniacal warlocks and creations of the Clan Skryre. The exact origins of the Skaven race are lost to history, but the earliest annals report of a race of red men conquering a city of the late Empire of Man. This city, in the world that was, found armies of the vermin bursting from the sewers and conquering the city before it had any time to respond. This city was renamed to Skaven and formed the first foothold of the Skaven within the known world. The Skaven found the world around them to be extremely hostile. Armies of men, greenskins, beastmen, and dwarves proved a larger threat than they could deal with. As such, the Skaven focused on expansion underground, preferring to conquer the ground beneath their enemies' feet first and feeling more comfortable in the empty void of the subterranean. The Skaven population grew in rapid pace, and soon the tunnels beneath Skavenblight were more packed with stinking bodies than a 40k convention. At this point in time, the first Skaven engineers started to appear as a plan was needed for rapid expansion. The most innovative Greyseers decided they could use the volatile material known as warpstone to build an enormous tunneling device. The usage of warpstone, basically crystallized chaos energy, was nothing new, but this was on an entire different scale altogether. So it came to be that a contraption of mind-blowing proportions and with a severe lack of safety measures was constructed beneath the Great Horned Rat's temple. Dozens of warlocks came together in a ritual to crack the earth of the world, allowing for worldwide expansion of the Skaven race. As one will find to be common within the Skaven race, not all went according to plan, and the device was unable to conduct the massive quantities of light magic that were forced into it. The result was an event known as the Disaster at Skavenblight. Similar to the Necroquake, magical earthquakes burst out from it and wormed through the earth of the world that was. Innumerable Skaven died outright, as the entirety of Skavenblight sunk into the ground, collapsing most of the existing underground empire. However, as the bells in the Great Horned Rat's temple toiled, the earth of the world cracked, mountains fell, oceans burst, and an entire underground realm was forced into reality. So even though this was the first of a long line of disasters to befall the Skaven race, the survivors mostly considered it a success. After excavating the tunnels in Skavenblight, they were now faced with near infinite room for expansion and exploration. It may come as no surprise to you that after this massive success, many Skaven elected to continue building devices with warpstone, branding themselves warlock engineers, and earning themselves wealth and renown as long as their experiments didn't blow up in their face. This eventually would lead to more and more extravagant creations, as well as the formation of Clan Skryre, arguably the most infamous and richest clan of the Skaven race. And even in the Age of Sigmar, the clans of the Skryre type are still very similar to this original clan. They worship their deity as a mad scientist bursting with warpstone energy and devastating weaponry, and while not overly religious, they do look to adorn their purple robes with green details to show their appreciation of the holy warpstone energy. But with the history covered, let's take a look at all the wild contraptions and crazy warlocks that can commonly be found within this clan. Every lowly Skaven within the ranks of Skryre dreams of one day claiming the title of warlock. For most, this is an unreachable goal, as they are more likely to die as a Skaven slave during one of the many failed experiments. The brightest and most cunning, however, manage to land themselves a position as a Skryre acolyte, basically an unpaid intern, but at a warlock's workshop. Here they are tasked with all the jobs too dangerous or tedious for the warlocks to do themselves. They are there to manage the Skaven slave population, handle toxic warpstone, and test devices that are as likely to explode as they are to work, hoping that one day they will manage to promote, either by merit or by accidentally, blowing up their superior. When the call of war brings them out of their workshop, the acolytes are equipped with poison wind globes. These are glass balls filled with a warpstone-induced poison gas. Anything touched by the gas melts and corrodes, which includes anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby. The globadiers will throw these orbs, creating clouds of poison gas that creep over the battlefield. Enemies caught within will rapidly choke as their lungs liquefy, their eyes turn to jelly, and their skin sloughs off. The acolytes themselves are protected by a thick, airtight suit and an air tank that protects them from their own weaponry. Provided, of course, that none of their rivals decided it would be fun to poke some holes in their tubing. Globadiers are intimidating to foe and ally alike. To the enemy, they are these mass monsters that emerge from the gas clouds, daggers in hand, ready to end you while you're incapacitated by the poison. To their allies, they are just as terrifying, because the wind can sometimes change direction, resulting in massive casualties on the wrong side of the battlefield. A final fun fact for these guys is that they have to make their own protective gear by themselves from the scraps found within the workshop. A considerable portion of acolytes will wipe themselves out in battle as a result of that, a phenomenon of natural selection that the warlocks do not mind whatsoever. While no longer a recognized rank within the Age of Sigmar, it used to be possible for acolytes to specialize in sowing gaseous annihilation on their enemies. These rats would become poison wind globadiers. During this era, the Skaven often found themselves fighting against dwarves in close quarters. But unlike the mechanical suits of the Caradron or the brazen nudity of the Fire Slayers, these dwarves wore extremely heavy plate armor. This provided great protection against the normal Skaven weaponry, with the exception of poisonous gas. Globadiers thus found themselves ranked just as highly as the other weapon specialists, and those I will cover in a bit. Equipped with magical body armor and elaborate anti-gas protection, they acted as elite units. Where the acolytes would be used as frontline chaff, these guys would hide within other regiments, only coming out to lob their nasty surprises at the enemy before disappearing into safety once again. A special variant of the poison wind globadiers are the dead globe bombardiers. These rats had manufactured a special variant of the warpstone gas traditionally found within their globes. This variant acted less like a suffocating blanket that could be wrapped over the enemy forces, but more like an explosive projectile. Basically, the gas would act much faster, resulting in rapid decomposition of the target. The quick death of the enemy of course being much preferred whenever they are in the act of firing back at you. Not to mention that this also reduced the chances of the gas flying back into your own troops. There was one major problem, however, with all of these poison wind grenades. The user had to get dangerously close to the target. Therefore, it may come as no surprise to you that many weapon specialists try to invent ways to fire their payloads from farther away. Within the armies of the Old World, this led to the invention of the poisoned wind mortar, likely based on the black powder weaponry used by the Empire of Man. This device consisted of a barrel into which the globe could be dropped. Upon hitting the bottom of the barrel, it is then shot out again by a firing mechanism. The Skaven would strap this contraption to the back of one specialist, while another would deposit globes into the barrel and communicate the best firing arcs. And now sure, this seems like a great invention, but please keep in mind that these globes sometimes also combusted within the mortars, leading to the unfortunate demise of their nearby artillery or commanders. Thus it may also come as no surprise to you that this weapon team is no longer observed in modern Skaven armies. The warlocks likely prefer their accidents to happen closer to the front line, further away from their own tails. As established before, the Skaven learned quickly after their creation that the surface is best avoided, preferring to stay underground, expanding their under-empire via tunnels, caves, or via the creations of other subterranean races. This, however, creates a massive demand for new tunnels and caverns to cram the ever-expanding population into. The solution Clan Skryre invented for this is the warp grinder. They built a device that generates a potent warpstone energy field. After charging this, it can then be fired away via a warpstone crystal, causing the target to basically be removed from reality. Enormous versions of these devices have been created to rapidly excavate new tunnel networks without the need for the much slower slave-based excavation methods. The main downside being that warp grinders don't magically build scaffolding, they just kinda Ctrl-Alt-Delete the rock. So quick tactical planning is needed to avoid the collapse of these fresh mine shafts, something which the Skaven, often forget to care about. Regardless, they are still used today and have even been upgraded to allow the Skaven to tunnel through reality, allowing them to travel from one realm to another via the creation of null holes. Funnily enough, this created a new safety hazard, as it is hard to predict where this new hole in reality will form. Entire clans have been wiped out after accidentally tearing a hole in an action magma lake. Small versions of the warp grinders were also developed, as Clan Ashen in particular showed interest in tunneling right beneath the enemy's feet. These portable versions could be used by weapons teams to create holes in the middle of the enemy line. Hordes of gutter runners or other melee infantry would then magically emerge, sowing chaos and confusion. Not to mention that the reality deletion field works just as well against vehicles or fortifications than it does against stone and bedrock. While on the topic of warp grinding, we should also talk about Skryre's underworld warband, Zikid's Tunnel Pack. This eccentric mischief set out for the riches found in the mines of Emberguard. This fallen city of Sigmar namely contains a treasure trove of emberstone within its bowels. Soon though, they came to the conclusion that there are way too many other parties invested in gathering the emberstone for themselves. Warlock engineer Zikid thus has devised a new plan, a better plan. If they collapse the entire tunnel network, all the competition will be dead, and they can gather the Realmstone in peace. Going from the front to the back, we start with Zikid himself. Zikid has always been obsessed with warp grinder technology, and his breakthrough has been the invention of a special portable warp grinder. Unlike the conventional system that has to be wheeled around by at least 2 Skaven, this version can be carried like a firearm. Practically acting like a mining drill and a portal gun in one, it allows him to quickly reposition within the Emberguardian mines, while also giving him the option to tactically sabotage its structural integrity. Above him we find Nitch Sinschnout, a bombardier in training who loves nothing more than making things go kaboom. His special contribution is the creation of the Blast Vermin, rats to which he binds explosives, after which they are greatly encouraged to run away from the party. This particular one has affectionately been called Tick Tick. Then there's Kritatok, who likes to cosplay as Freddy Krueger. Constantly tapping and scraping his metal claws across the stone, he doesn't just do this to intimidate his prey though, rather he believes that the spirit of the stone talks to him that way, alerting him of weaknesses in the tunnels or the presence of valuable magical treasure. Whether he is insane or not is besides the point. So far his insights have been mostly correct. Finally, there is Ritak Verm, who shares his boss's passion for tunneling. He has created the Kill Wheel, a tiny merger of a Doom Wheel and a Warp Grinder. He is reckless and loves nothing more than dashing through the mines at breakneck speed, obliterating enemies along the way. That being said, he would be wise to regularly check his equipment, because Zikid grows more worried every day that his pupil may start to outshine him, so a small act of sabotage would not be out of the question. The Warp Spark Weapon Battery is a catch-all term for a group of Skryre weapon teams, which can come with a variety of armaments. The most common 3 types will be covered here, but you never know what new madness the warlocks of Skryre will come up with. The tried and true Rattling Gun was already a Skaven staple in the world that was, and little has changed in that regard. There are few weapon teams in existence that have such a penchant for utter destruction without having to resort to artillery. Based on the repeater gun system found within the late Empire, the Warlock engineers have upgraded the device with belt-fed ammunition and warpstone bullets. The result is an infernal gun with a massive rate of fire that shoots radioactive bullets with such a speed that they can penetrate solid steel. Naturally, this comes with the added risk of nuclear meltdown if the weapon is not allowed to cool down frequently enough, but that is a risk the commander on the other side of the battlefield is perfectly willing to take. Since this weapon lacks the volatile liquid tanks or high energy sparks of the next weapons, you may expect that Rattling Gunners enjoy a level of relative safety. Nothing is further from the truth however, but not for the reason that you may expect. See, the extremely high rate of fire makes these weapons almost impossible to control, and the recoil frequently causes entire squads of friendly troops to be turned into Swiss cheese. Or teeth breakers, as the Skaven slaves call them, because their bodies are so riddled with bullets that it is a hazard to eat them afterwards. It is not uncommon for rattling squads to mysteriously disappear after the battle, unceremoniously disposed of by the surviving members of a teeth breaker squad. The person who decided to combine napalm-like chemicals with a solid dose of powdered warpstone must have been insane, or a Skaven. The result is a hellish green fire that is impossible to extinguish, capable of melting stone, armor and flesh alike. The weaponization of this invention led to the creation of the warp fire thrower. Here we find one Skaven carrying a liquid tank filled with flammable chemicals and a supply of warpstone powder. With a flick of the switch, the components are pumped together and magical fire shoots from the nozzle aimed by the other Skaven. This weapon proved excellent at dealing with enemies in close quarters and forms a staple for tunnel warfare. Despite that, there are certain downsides that should not be ignored. The tank wielded by the carrier is large and filled with combustible materials. Enemies will find that by aiming for these tanks, they can cause a Skaven to blow up in a satisfying mushroom cloud. Leaks too are a common occurrence, which often end in the same way as described above. But even if they do work as intended, they leave a taint of chaos energy that will linger for years, making the tunnel inhospitable to life. The latest invention of the Clan Skryre is a Warp Vault Scourger. It was created after an event which the other clans found extremely inspiring and funny. Clan Electric, a Skryre clan specialized in warp lightning cannons, tried to come up with a way to make a smaller version of them, similar to how the warp grinders could be turned into paw-held weapons. The result was an explosion that obliterated most of their territory in Blight City. Other Galvaniers later concluded that maybe one should not put the same voltage on a crystal the size of your paw than you would put on a crystal the size of a horse. Then they made the Warp Vault Scourger, which can be operated by a weapons team and which fires a bolt of warpstone electricity. So while not as powerful as a cannon variant, the lightning bolt has a tendency to spark between targets whenever they are close enough to each other. Sure, it may be a side grade in that regard, but the compactability is very desirable for a tunnel-based race. Another classic from the world that was is the Warplock Jezzail, which many warlock engineers consider the pinnacle of Skaven weaponry. Deadly, long range, and relatively reliable, what more could you want from a weapon? The long barrel design, combined with bullets made from pure, top-grade warpstone, allows for range and accuracy that nothing can really match. They are easy to carry, allowing for quick repositioning or for utilization in urban environments. The bullets are one of the few things that can reliably punch through Sigmarite, and once they have hit their mark, they cause deadly warpstone radiation poisoning. Warlords love them, as a small group of Jezzails can ensure the destruction of any elite unit before they even enter the battlefield. Clans Ashen love them, for they can be used to assassinate leaders in the comfort of their own home, without the need for tedious infiltration plans. Even the lowly Clanrat loves them, as they can be fired from miles away, while also being the only Skaven weapon that doesn't result in grudges from friendly fire accidents. There is just one downside to this otherwise perfect weapon, and that has to do with the warpstone rounds. See, these crystal rounds fly through and can pierce very well, but they also taint the air they shoot through. This causes clear, glowing traces to linger between the target and the Jezzail, so their position is quickly revealed, leaving them open to return fire or retaliatory strikes. The Skaven have quote-unquote solved that by giving the stabilizer a wooden shield, but you can imagine how well that stops artillery fire. Thankfully, the usual Skaven wisdom has another solution, which is to just bring more to compensate for the casualties. Stormfiends are one of the most terrifying things you will encounter amongst the armies of the Clan Skryre. These monsters are the combination of rat ogres created by Clan Molder and the craziest tech available to Clan Skryre. Rat ogres are hulking brutes that function as excellent line breakers, but there's just one tiny problem, which is that they are really stupid. Like, it is good that their head is attached, otherwise they probably would forget it. Anyways, Clan Skryre at some point considered adding heavy weapon ornaments to these beasts, but quickly discovered they would keep on firing indiscriminately at anything that came nearby. In a rare example of collaboration, the Masters Molder and Warlock engineers invented the Brain Rat. These creepy creations are linked to the ogre's body and basically take over, like how you would control an avatar in a video game. This resulted in vile creatures that liked nothing more than sowing death and destruction, but at least they knew how to aim and usually targeted the enemy. With that sorted out, they invented some more improvements like warpstone-based stimpaks that enhanced the base frame with greater strength, or armor plates that could be fused to the skin of the ogres. After amputating the hands of these Stormfiends, they can then be replaced with all sorts of weapons, often a variant of those wielded by the weapon teams. Grinder fists are basically warp grinders and allow the fiend to tunnel through the ground. Warp fire projectors, rattling cannons, and wind launchers unleash the same destructive forces as their weapon team counterpart. Shock gauntlets create arcs of sparking lightning, and there is even a miniature Doomflayer in the form of the Doomflayer gauntlets. Talking about the Doomflayer chassis started out as an attempt to speed up tunnel excavation. Instead of holding up a middle finger to reality by using a warp grinder, and risking total collapse while doing so, the Flayer chopped away stone in a more traditional way. This was all nice and dandy, but it took about 5 seconds for some warlock engineer to realize the total devastation this device could manufacture in warfare. Initially, the idea was that this device could unclog underground battlefields by chopping a path through all the bodies and debris, but of course they were rapidly pointed away to clear out the living bodies as well. In essence, this is a ball of blades that rolls forward and chops apart anything that tries to deny it from doing so. To provide it with the required power, it has been outfitted with a warpstone-powered engine. To put it in modern terms, imagine a haphazard nuclear reactor without a cooling system. Usually these things don't explode, but of course the Skaven felt it necessary to incorporate a turbocharger. This allowed them to rapidly chop apart things with an unnatural speed, giving a Bugatti Veyron a run for its money. Yet of course it also comes with a 33% chance of spontaneous combustion. Further fun facts include that the first Doomflayer was built using the parts of a crashed gyrocopter. So yep, the dwarves are partially to blame for this war crime. And that the original design bound the driver to the back with chains. This prevented him from falling off, but just as frequently the chains got caught in the blades and he was pulled into his own meat grinder. Therefore these chains have been removed in the newer designs. The Doom Wheel is one of the infernal creations that made Claw famous, alongside of the Doom Sphere and the Warp Lightning Cannon. Don't worry, by the way, we will cover all of those in a bit. But first, the Doom Wheel. Probably the weirdest contraption found amongst the Clan Skryre. This in essence is a massive hamster ball powered by a small legion of warpstone-fed rats. They run and run, which keeps the massive wooden construction moving. Okay, cool, but since these rats are all living beings, their motivation to run varies a lot. Therefore this device can move at massive speed, but also be stuck at a snail pace. The main issue being that this speed is completely unreliable, which makes the device impossible to steer in a meaningful way. Even better is the fact that there's a warpstone battery built inside, which constantly releases intoxicating fumes, meaning that the warlock driving this highly unstable contraption is not just steering an unreliable ball of death, but also doing so while high as a kite. It is not uncommon for Doom Wheels to spell the doom of a Skaven regiment alongside the one of the enemy. The power built up by the running rats flows into the warpstone battery, which is then used to create sparks of lightning. These shoot from the warpstone crystals at the front, but not necessarily in that direction. Standing close to a Doom Wheel is as likely to get you killed as standing where the cannons are pointing at. Altogether, this device is unreliable, as deadly to Skaven as it is to enemies, and totally absurd to behold. But at the same time, there are few things as good at breaking a defensive line than this bad boy. Finally, I want to include a quote from an Unbroken cultist who just saw one killing all of his friends, because the quote is absolutely hilarious. For those out of the loop, the cult's Unbroken are the humans that are worshipping the Great Wheel. Aye, the Great Wheel turns alright. It turns, and it hates us all. The Rattling Warp Blaster is simply put an upscaled version of the Rattling Gun. Not particularly innovative, but can you blame them? The Rattling Gun has been a staple in Skaven armies for millennia, and even after all this time remains the pinnacle of anti-infantry firepower, so naturally some warlocks thought that it would be a great idea to build them bigger and deadlier. This all became possible when the Warpstone Accelerator was invented. Unlike the Rattling Gun, which is powered by a hand crank, this device allows the rapid expulsion of warpstone bullets together with enough rotational force to prevent the barrels from melting, enabling a higher rate of fire and thus creating more infantry stopping power. The one issue was that the recoil became even more uncontrollable. Therefore, the War Blaster was mounted on a gunnery platform and equipped with some unfortunate slaves to push it towards the battlefield. Now you might think that the warlock operating this contraption may be enjoying a relative role of safety and luxury. This couldn't be further from the truth, however, as the Warpstone Accelerator is also incredibly good at accelerating its own explosion in case something goes wrong. So yes, you may sit comfy in your chair, raining hell on the enemy infantry, but every second you pull the trigger may be the last moment of your miserable life. The Warp Lightning Cannon is another highly unstable but incredibly destructive creation. All of this makes perfect sense when you realize that just like the Doom Wheel, this bizarre contraption comes from the mind of Ikit Claw. The principle behind the Warp Lightning Cannon is relatively simple. Warpstone can generate incredible amounts of energy in rapid fashion. By excavating a chunk the size of a rhino and charging it, you can thus generate a mind-blowing amount of power. Ikit found that if you hex a metal barrel with enough magical runes, you can use this to condense the generated power into a ray of unstoppable destruction. Like seriously, the power buildup is so immense that the entire battlefield can feel the presence of these cannons before they even fire. The air starts to become static, an ozone smell drapes over the war zone like a blanket, and a sun of sickly green light starts to rise behind the Skaven backline. For some, that will be the last sight they ever see, as the blast instantly scorches their retina away. The blast meanwhile can punch clean through rock, sigmarite, magical barriers, anything you can come up with basically. There will be a clean scorched hole in everything between the cannon and its target. Or the Skaven thing happens, and instead it turns into a small mushroom cloud and half of the Skaven backline is eliminated in less than a second. Regardless of this common unreliability, the Warp Lightning Cannon is a terrifying siege weapon that should be taken very seriously. Those Skaven, smart, lucky, or cunning enough to achieve a position of status within the Clan Skryre are referred to as warlock engineers. They can be found leading the workshops and laboratories of the Clan Skryre. It is their job to invent and produce myriads of magical and mechanical tools of destruction, a task that almost exclusively relies on the incorporation and exploitation of Warpstone. Warpstone is in essence crystallized chaos magic, which results in dark green material that glows with a sickly green glow. This material contains such an absurd amount of magical power that even Skaven consider it too dangerous to use before a Greyseer has blessed it. But thereafter, it forms the cornerstone of Skaven society, used as a power source, currency, stimulant, mutagen, jewelry, or weapon. It is such a crucial element in fact, that it is even considered a gift from the Great Horned Rat by some Skaven, and thus it is sometimes referred to as Godstone. Few creatures understand the exact workings and potential of this material better than the Warlock Engineers. After all, the better one understands it, the more efficiently one can churn out weapons and contraptions, making mastery over this material one of the most important metrics by which a Warlock's skill can be measured. The usage of this unstable magical crystal makes it so that every machine created by these rats is as much magical as it is mechanical. To the Warlock Engineers, it matters little, however, as they don't even make that distinction. As may have been guessed from their chosen title, they are as comfortable with magic as with conventional weaponry, something which you also see when they enter the battlefield. The main purpose why Warlocks go to war is to see how their latest toys perform in action, but that doesn't mean that they aren't down to play themselves. Using a combination of magic and high-tier weaponry, Warlock Engineers are pretty capable of ditching out pain themselves. Finally, reminiscent of the Adeptus Mechanicus, it is common practice within the ranks of the Warlocks to replace body parts with mechanical replacements. Many believe that they could do a much better job at making certain body parts than nature and thus arrogantly self-amputate to give room for their latest improvement. Warlock Galvaniers form a peculiar subculture of the Warlock Engineers. These twitchy and erratic Skaven are obsessed with the beauty of warp lightning, seeking specialization in weapons that make ample use of this, and as a result often exposing themselves to regular shocks when things don't exactly go as planned. Cackling, twitching, and with literal brain damage, these guys are crazy even by Skaven standards. Regardless, they make effective additions to an army. They make sure that the warp lightning cannons and doom wheels run optimally, and thus provide a barrage of glorious warp lightning bolts that the Galvanier can wonder at. When all else fails, they also pack their own heat in the form of the Warp Volt Obliterator. This thing very much does what it says on the tin. It obliterates things with high voltage warpstone arcs. Another interesting subculture of the Warlock Engineer caste is that of the Warlock Bombardiers. These pyromaniacs forego the complex mechanisms of conventional engineering in favor of the unpredictable adrenaline-fueled destruction of doom rockets. A vibe anyone who has ever played Total War Warhammer can surely relate to. These red men spend all of their efforts into creating the massive artillery shells known as doom rockets. These are warpstone-infused explosives propelled into the sky by a reservoir of liquidized warpstone, and on impact this crazy warhead goes off, causing total annihilation of anything nearby. Technically, the bombardiers should be smart enough to properly calculate the firing arcs of these devices, but accidents do happen, in which a bombardier is a bit too enamored by the carnage he is inflicting to care about hitting the right target. It may then be considered karma that these rockets sometimes refuse to fly altogether, creating the same devastation as before, but then right in the bombardier's face. The pinnacle of warlock engineering can be found in the Arch-Warlock. These towering metal contraptions, covered in tubes, gears and warpstone energy, form the de facto leaders of the Clan Skryre. Like Iron Man, they clad themselves in suits of enchanted metal to keep them safe from both enemies as well as friendly fire accidents. Common weapon choices include gauntlets that spout warp fire, lightning talons, and power glaives. They further sport a ether accumulator on their back, and this device builds up magical power like a battery. It can then be drained to enhance their already impressive magical capabilities. Naturally, this thing is again built with warpstone, and thus it is prone to exploding when used too much. The front line is not a location any Arch-Warlock likes to be, but keep in mind that this weapon suit also comes in handy when searching for arcane knowledge in the depths of the Under-Empire, or for when you want to pay a deadly visit to a political rival, or simply to discourage any other rivals from doing the same thing to you. In terms of leadership, Arch-Warlocks are the highest ranking members in Age of Sigmar and usually lead a small clan single-handedly. For larger clans, small groups called covens can lead them together. For the Warhammer Fantasy fans, there used to be one higher rank, which was claimed by Warp Lord Morskatar. He was a member of the Council of 13 and the leader of the original Clan Skryre. Currently, however, the title of Warp Lord is no longer a thing, as the clan is split over uncountable clans Skryre that all operate more or less independently of each other. Yeah, I know this is a time to put down a towel and get the special sock out. I don't think there is anyone with even a remote connection to Warhammer who doesn't know who this Giga Chad is, but I will introduce him anyways. Meet Ikitclaw, the greatest Warlock engineer to ever Warlock engineer. Ikitclaw's real claim to fame starts during the Great Skaven Civil War, but before that happens, we should talk about his expedition. See, a young Ikit decided that in order to become the best Warlock in the world, he would have to not just obtain mastery of Skaven magics, but mastery of all magics found within the world that was. He traveled to the filthy jungles of Lustria to observe the creations of the Old Ones. He tortured necromancers to learn command over the dead, and then proceeded to torture the resurrected dead as well to learn even more. He infiltrated the dragon kingdoms of Cathay, walked in the forges of the Chaos Dwarves, sailed the Sea of Chill on a black ark, walked the Land of Death and more. But after seeing all the world had to offer, his conclusion was that the amateuristic contraptions of Skryre were pretty much a joke. He then travelled back to Skavenblight and proposed a plan to Warlord Morskatar of biblical proportions. You know, be prepared from the Lion King? Imagine that, but then 10 times cooler. Ikit was appointed as the new right hand of Clan Skryre and set off to make Skryre great again. No cost was spared as the entire foundation of Skavenblight was carved away to be filled with forges upon forges upon forges. Ikit started developing new weapons like the Warp Lightning Cannon and the Doom Wheel. Altogether, all was going well, but then the war happened. The specifics are the topic for another video really, but basically an all-out war started between Clan Pestilence, Skryre, and Molder, and Eshin kind of fulfilled the role of the Swiss, if you know what I mean. Ikitclaw was placed in charge of the Skryre war effort and managed to deliver such an overwhelming level of magic and firepower that Skryre managed to practically take over Skavenblight during a war that lasted over 400 years, cementing himself as the best Skaven to ever tinker. Later, he would go on to build an atomic bomb underneath Karak Azul called the Doomsphere, and if it weren't for Tanquil, he probably would have succeeded in that. He furthermore managed to survive the end of times and features in Hamilcar, Champion of the Gods. What he is up to now in Age of Sigmar is unknown, however, as he was never mentioned again after that novel. Ikit is clad in an enchanted mech suit. He built this after he accidentally blew half his face off during a failed experiment, incorporating a warpstone-powered exoskeleton to return functionality to the left side of his body. It may seem embarrassing, but with how powerful the suit is now, it may as well be considered an improvement. It also features a warpfire gauntlet, a power claw, and a warp generator that leeches magic from the air to power his own gear. The final thing I want to mention is his glaive. The magical weapon is called Storm Demon and is basically an Eldritch Blast stick. Point it at anything and it goes kaboom in a violent arc of warp lightning. Now you may think that this all seems very familiar to the current Arch Warlock suit, and you would be perfectly correct in that. In fact, Ikit's model was even used as the official Arch Warlock model until a new model came out during 4th edition. With Ikit done, that basically wraps up the entire Clan Skryre Armory, and thus we have reached the end of the first chapter in the Skaven series. Clan Skryre is the faction to pick if you are into tinkering with electronics, engineering, or if you simply suffer from pyromania. Their devices are incredibly impressive and usually outperform those of any other faction, if only they weren't so prone to exploding. Personally, I've always had an enormous hard-on for the Rattling Gunner, as there is nothing better than settling down a gun line of those in Total War and watching the enemy army just melt. But please, also tell me about your favorite unit in the comments down below. I will go back to the writing room to work on the next chapter, so stay tuned and make sure to click the subscribe button so you will be notified when it's ready.